what, we're seeing different procedures, especially, how we do meetings and how we reach out to people. But another change has been our travel consultation. And so, Sean, maybe this is a good time to talk a little bit about how we're working through travel coordination during this time.
All right, sure. So we did modify our tribal consultation procedure slightly with in guidance with ACHP instructions that came out in April. The ACHP provided guidance regarding 106 reviews by tribal consulting parties impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. They did not issue any modifications to existing 106 review requirements per se, just that they indicated that response deadlines for DIPOs was considered paused while their offices are closed, and that tribes may be unable to carry out their Section 106 duties in a timely fashion. They also recommended that federal agencies make an effort to reach out directly to tribes to assess their status. So after reading the guidance provided by ACHP, CRO on behalf of Federal Highway called a number of our tribal consultants and confirmed that yes, offices were indeed closed, and by this time we were also receiving out of office emails from the majority of our tribal consulting parties. The ACHP strongly encouraged federal agencies to be flexible with Section 106 deadlines when they found that relevant consulting parties were unable to meet their review obligations. So we went back to our tribal MOU to find where we could be flexible with tribal reviews. And the MOU makes it clear that tribes may enter the 106 process at any time or re-enter into consultation at any point in the process. So CRO then spoke with Federal Highway and the Miami Tribe to revise our Tribal 106 review policy to better align with the flexibility measures recommended by ACHP. And we did that by revising our 106 email notification templates to make it clear that tribes may enter the process at any time. And this modified template was provided to the consultants through a listserv that explained that although a tribe may not respond to the early coordination letter, the same tribe may decide to be a consulting party before the finding is made. Tribes would have access to all 106 documents prepared to date through InScope, and we would accept their comments at any point in the 106 process. Additionally, Federal Highway and INDOT committed to amending findings of effects should any tribe provide input after the finding was signed. It seems that tribal offices are slowly reopening, but we are still receiving some out of office replies from a few tribes. So we're going to continue with this policy until we're certain that tribes have returned to their offices and have resumed their 106 review obligations. So I don't know, a couple more months probably, but seems to be working well. Haven't noticed any hiccups yet or anything in our 106 review process, and we are receiving more responses from tribes now than we were in April when we modified our policies. So.
All right, thanks, Sean. Does anybody have any questions about tribal coordination? And if you do, feel free to chat, and we'll come back to it if we get those questions or input. And let's see, at this point, we did want to, we know we had some folks from out of state, if you don't mind being called out. Jamie from the city of Chicago, are you in the meeting?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi. So, so we were wondering, what kind of if you wouldn't mind sharing your experience or any input or insights of life in COVID and working in the COVID?
Working COVID. Well, I work in Chicago, and our show is in Springfield, so I think some of our switching over, even if it wasn't for the general public, but switching over some of our meetings to Teams or teleconference. It did invite a few more participants too from our other departments and other sister agencies, and like you mentioned earlier about travel costs and expenses, and that's always been something we tried to keep in mind when we do invite SHPO to come up to Chicago or vice versa. That was for budget reasons, but then also now for health reasons. So yeah, I think it's helped increase a bit communications, just consultation wise, coordinating on different projects that were ongoing. I haven't hosted a public Section 106 meeting yet, a virtual one. So, but it might in the near future, because this seems like we're going to be expanding our working from home policy to pretty much the end of the year, end of calendar year.
Wow.
So I'm working from home at the moment, but we will be rotating like back into the office. But I think, as you mentioned, it's probably, going to be the way to move forward, or at least to supplement if we are going to do some limited in-person meetings, to still have a virtual option. The only other drawback, though, I'd say is, even though there are some more maybe agency participants and some people at home, I think there is still a question of lower income folks being able to participate when it's only virtual, and some concern about some of our senior citizen people who were some of the ones that would come in person, were more likely to come in person and maybe aren't as tech savvy, or who don't have the internet speed, access. So that would be, I think that's kind of one of the hurdles that, we were going to try to think about how to do that. And, it might be coordinating with our public libraries or places that have computer access, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. Our consulting parties meeting we had last week, we had the city offered to host and invite, so that that if there were people who could not access or didn't have the capability to join the meeting virtually, could come to a large meeting space and be, socially distance in that way. So, and that's other things maybe we can explore is, if most people are doing it virtually, then we're going to have less people in person, and that it's easier to separate people a little bit. And Sarah, do you know if anybody, I don't recall if anybody showed up to the live.
We did a survey ahead of time, and we asked about the capabilities of being able to attend virtually. And then we had a follow-up question that if they had concerns about it, if they would be interested in an alternative location where they could follow social distancing guidelines and still interact with the meeting. And almost everyone that we had invited to the meeting and ended up coming did respond to the survey, and no one was interested in an alternative location, but we did have it prepared and kind of had it ready in case that wasn't need that we needed.
Okay. Well, and I think that's a good point too, like with the survey, trying to reach out to people, like what can you do, what it works for you. So I think that's another good way we can try to resolve some of those issues.
Yeah, I think the other issue was, someone mentioned Zoom. Some of the platforms have a security concern where you want to have it open to the public, but then you also don't want to have strange comments that are not relevant to the project. Let me phrase it that way. We had a couple of things happen with some of our aldermanic meetings where it was Zoom bombing, I think is the term, or so just managing the new platform and still being allowing meaningful public interaction, but still having to monitor like who's commenting and how to manage it, but still have it transparent. It's kind of a work in progress, like you said.
Yeah, good points. Did Christina Boykin from the Arkansas DOT, are you on the call? Okay, we did have somebody from the Arkansas DOT, so that we thought that'd be good to get another DOT perspective. But, and I think Sarah, you had your hand raised. Did you want to talk?
No, that was an accident.
Okay, no problem. I did see Christina Bowman had on the chat TV. I had I think was a suggestion or point of discussion was TV public broadcasting. So we have not done this, I don't think, before. But that might be, especially in some of our markets, might be another option for public access.
I will say we're looking at doing that for some of the public hearing type meetings.
Yeah. Kia, did we do that for North Split?
We have not done it yet, but we are looking at it as an option for the hearing.
Okay. Yeah. Now I think we should be, in general, I think we should be open to all these, avenues. So I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, flexibility is important. And I guess we should maybe move on, Patrick, to
Sure, yeah.
Other parts, but of our discussion. But if something pops up and you want to return to the topic of 106 during COVID, please raise your hand or chat. But now I think we're going to turn our focus a little bit beyond that and just kind of open up the floor to any other general Section 106 questions. We did get one question via email prior to the meeting from Elizabeth Biggio at BFNS. And that was regarding Section 4F de minimis determinations for INDOT-sponsored curb ramp projects, which often fall under the minor projects programmatic agreement, Category B projects that we do, that our office approves and doesn't require full Section 106 consultation. And so, actually, we have an update on this, hot off the presses, I think, and I'm going to turn it over. Anu, I hope you're there, and you've led this effort, so I want to give you the opportunity to give everyone an update on this, if you can. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I guess most of you are probably aware of what the Section 4F MOU is. That was originally executed in January of 2020 sometime. December, January of 2020 is when we executed that. It was understood the update is fairly minor, and the update was just made, and we got all the signatures on the 8th of June 2020. But we made that update to clarify some of the, because we were getting questions from a lot of people about whether or not the Section 4F MOU would be applicable to projects that were being cleared under the MPPA. So just to make that clear, in the language of the MOU, we made a minor update. And so now, basically, the MOU clearly states that the MOU basically satisfies the notification requirements specified in 23 CFR 774 for all projects that have been cleared under the MPPA, as well as where there is a determination of no adverse effect or where there are no historic properties affected associated with a Section 4F historic resource. So basically, if there is a de minimis finding on a historic resource, or if the project's being cleared under the MPPA, the only exception to this rule would be NHL resources. It would not apply to those. For those, we do have to go through the individual 4F determination. So what this MOU basically does is it reduces Federal Highway's review of CE documents that previously had required Federal Highway's approval of Section 4F de minimis determinations. So, right now, with this MOU in place, it's a programmatic approach, and so the level of the CE document has dropped down to CE level 2. So that is essentially the purpose of the MOU, and the update clearly now clarifies that MPPA projects where there's very minimal right of way from a historic resource being taken would be a de minimis finding. Otherwise, if it had to go through full 106, could be cleared under the MPPA as well. So any questions on that?
And new, for those who aren't as familiar, I think we've got a diversity of people on the call, that some of whom are super probably familiar with our MPPA, and maybe some who aren't as familiar. One of the things about our MPPA is that most of the Category B projects, which are those categories, you know, that we're talking about now, that we approve and don't do full 106 consultation on, most of those are, preclude any projects that are adjacent to historic resources. So that would kind of, you know, mean that we wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't really apply to those types of work projects, right? Like if you're building a trail or you're replacing a bridge. But there's a couple types of projects, most importantly curb ramp projects and culvert projects, which allow for Category B approval for projects that are adjacent to historic resources. So that's, you know, so right. So those are the main areas where this would be applicable.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, we do have options, some of the categories in our minor projects PA, basically cover cover this, where, you know, they do occur adjacent. We do allow projects like, you know, curb ramp replacements, etc., within historic districts to happen or adjacent to a historic property. And some of these, sometimes just because of the nature of the project, we do have to get onto property that may be part of a historic resource, but it's very minimal just to put in a curb ramp. But, you know, already there's a curb ramp in place, but you're just updating it or something like that. That's when, you know, there may be slight need for some minor acquisition as part of that, or we may have to get onto the property to do some work. Things like that. That would be really not, and so we may have to do some grading after or something. That's very minimal. That would not rise to a level where it would be anything more than a minor project still. So it would still qualify under the PA. And those are the ones that we're talking about under the PA. The PA by its nature, the projects that are covered under the PA are supposed to be minor. So they never can rise to any other level beyond a no adverse effect. So that is the thinking behind it, is basically that these projects are relatively really minor. They can't rise to a level. If there is any doubt that that's might rise, the impacts would be more than minor, then we would think about it. Or there's controversy, public controversy or something, associated with the project, even if the impacts are not that great, we would definitely internally decide to go with full Section 106 for those kind of projects. So,
yeah. And in that regard, we have a question about what do we mean by adjacent? And is there a set limit measurement for that? Good question.
That's the $1 million question, right?
It varies.
Right.
it really does. We have to look at it, and we look at a lot of different things. When we are talking minor, it's usually a small sliver that we're talking about to get a ramp in with the right slope, or stuff like that. If there's a large, so it really does. It depends on what you're doing and how much you're taking.
And then contrasted with an overlay project that you would consider your project area very narrow. If we do a bridge replacement, sometimes we're looking at a 1/4 mile out. So it really depends on the nature of the project and your topography, your setting. If you're in a hilly area with lots of trees and vegetation that would block views, then you might have a smaller area. If you're in northern Indiana and it's completely flat and you're replacing an elevated bridge, then you're going to go wider out. So it really depends on what your project is and really where your project is. And so that's really our kind of our guiding principles on that. But it does really it's dependent on those factors.
And the CRO reviewer is going to have to use their discretion. And also, when we get into the territory of, well, we're really not sure, sometimes we're able to go to SHPO and ask them for their opinion informally. But I would also say this relates to maybe another issue that sometimes we deal with. We get questions from consultants about MPPA applicability for projects. And if you're at the point where you're wondering whether a certain potentially historic property is actually adjacent to a project and wondering whether the MPPA might apply, you're probably in a position where you need to provide a scope for full 106, right? Or at least a tiered scope, and hopefully you'll get, maybe you'll get a nice surprise, and it will, we'll make a determination that category B fits, but you kind of have to prepare for the worst in that sense, and hope for the best. So is there anything else, any other questions related to that issue or the 4F, or anything you want to add, Patrick, Anu?
I just want to say, if you're in doubt, definitely contact us. That's number one. If you even think that there is a chance that this might be relatively minor, the MPPA covers a lot, but it doesn't cover everything. So we've tried, it's basically based on our experience over the years that it has been amended several times, and we've added categories as we've gone along, but there's always something that may still be minor, and it's not exactly covered in the way the MPPA is, written out for the categories. So definitely check with us. We may still be able to clear those, but you would need to check with us if you are not fully sure.
And in that vein too, we want to encourage people not to assume their project will fall under the PA unduly, where you might sit on it, where then you submit it, and we have identified an issue, or there's a controversial aspect that we know about, or we know there's historic properties that you might not be aware, so that would kick it into full 106. So we would also encourage, first thing you do very early on is start looking at the PA and talk to us, and so we don't want to wait too long if full 106 is required.
And I see we had another question about for section 106 4F, does it apply to the community at large? And is it less about the structure type and materials, but more about the urban fabric and how the community grew historically? I'm going to try to answer this question, but please let me know if I misunderstand. Yeah, if you know, there's for a property to become a historic 4F property, all that means is it's eligible or listed in the National Register of Historic Places as a result of the Section 106 process. So, and something can be eligible or listed in the National Register under any of the criteria, and that includes both its historic importance within the urban fabric, settlement patterns, all of those things you mentioned. It can also be about the architectural importance of the building or the engineering importance of a structure. So it's both, really. So I hope that answers your question. Let us know if it doesn't. Hey, Brandon, do you want to type? You can type it out, or you can speak.
Yeah, I guess I could speak here. So I guess my question is, if a community or a settlement, like a subdivision, is, I mean, the historic beginning of it is, you know, during like suburban expansion, and there's not really any emphasis on bicycle and pedestrian amenities. If that is something that would be brought up to a Section 106 4F property or community, is this bicycle and or pedestrian amenity outside of ADA ramps threatening the historical integrity of the community or that neighborhood?
That's actually a great question, really. And it's a tricky thing, and I think we run into it a lot, where, where, I mean, hypothetically, the answer is yes. It could be, right? So, and
on that, I suppose.
What's that?
No, you're definitely right. Like it's the original like urban form wasn't meant to accommodate bicycles, and historically that's not something that is important to that community. But maybe local plans or like local outreach has kind of gone against that. What do you do there?
Sure. And I think it's tough because we might have a project where we say something has an adverse effect under Section 106 because it diminishes the historic integrity of a property, while at the same time, I think even those of us who are, no matter how committed you are to historic preservation, you got to admit that some of these projects, including pedestrian connectivity and bicycle connectivity, are really important. And so that's not to diminish the overall potentially very positive effects that a project might have. There could be creative ways, and it really is case specific, There could be ways of, looking at a project, really kind of figuring out, well, does this really diminish the integrity? I'm not sure. Is it really important that this neighborhood doesn't have sidewalks? Is that part of the historic integrity? I don't know. It's an open question. Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, now we've had, thinking more narrowly maybe on like multi-use trails, we've had multi-use trails that have resulted in adverse effects because they might remove vegetation, trees. They'll absorb the buffer, the grass buffer, or they're a new element. So we've had those that have actually resulted in adverse effects. It's more commonly a no adverse effect, but in some cases they have been adverse effects. And we'll go through the process. We'll do a MOA. We'll have mitigation, and so and because we have an adverse effect, like I think what Anthony was saying doesn't mean it's a bad project, a bad idea, not worth going through. But we do have to go through that process, and it might be an adverse effect. And so that's really where we rely on our consultation with SHPO and consulting parties to figure that out, what the effect really is. So.
And I think, I mean, you were involved with this. One of the biggest examples of that is a cultural trail in Indianapolis, right? Where parts of that were an adverse effect and required mitigation. Now I feel like it has a happy ending though, right? I mean, the project wasn't stopped, you know, just because you have an adverse effect is not going to kill a project. There was historical signage that was put up. There was consultation on types of vegetation. There were some, exhibits, I think, or I'm not sure, Patrick, you were more involved, but I think, like, in general, I think it turned out pretty well.
Right. Yep. So if you're on Mass Avenue and different places, you see interpretive, signage with historic photos, that was mitigation for the cultural trail. And we've done the, Georgia Street, and we've had Auburn. We had an adverse effect on a trail in a historic district, and so we've had a few, and I think they've turned out to be good projects, and we've tried to do good mitigation. And yes, I think Brandon, you're asking if we're involved, even though it's not a state facility. Yeah, so we do actually. We help administer all federal aid projects, even if they're LPAs. So we are involved in state and LPA projects. So
if they have federal highway money.
Yeah, right. If they have federal highway money. And maybe this is a good time maybe to start to segue into the AI. We wanted to kind of bring up the AI, some guidance on AIs.
Right. So we get a lot of questions about, well, okay, so we went through 106 process, like, it could be a year ago, it could be 5 years ago, it could be 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But now the project has, the project never happened, or the project got partially constructed, or the project, anyway, Section 106 needs to be reopened. NEPA is being reopened. And there may be an AI being prepared under NEPA. And what do we do? What do we need to do with Section 106? We have we have HPRs, we have a signed finding, and just the general rule, to be honest, is we have a set. Yes, additional information. Thank you, Mary, for AI additional information. And so we get a range of different types of situations that come through our office. And to be honest, it's really project specific on how we deal with them. It might just be a note to file. It might require totally reopening the 106 process, or there might be something in between, like issuing an addendum 811 and a new signed finding. We have, a set of internal principles that we rely on to make that determination, but it's really got to be a case-by-case determination. And so part of that is it's important to contact us regarding what will be appropriate before assuming, based off of past experience, because policies change, they evolve. So what might have been appropriate for reconsultation a year ago is not going to be maybe now. And so we want you to contact us. And then once you contact us and get guidance, if for whatever reason, it's another year before you actually submit stuff to us, it's really important not to assume that previous guidance is still precise. So it's important to contact us again. And that kind of goes for, in general, not just AI, but in general, waiting long periods of time between submissions. We understand that has to happen sometimes, but that raises, there might be a chance that in the interim, things have changed, policies have changed. So it's important to keep that on your mind. That's a possibility. Anu, did I sum that up, or Patrick, you want to jump in? Are there other related issues to that?
I think you summed it up pretty well, Anthony. the only thing I might want to add is, there are some of these projects that are also phased, where construction of some phases have been completed, and then there's a phase that you just now got funding for after almost a decade or whatever. So there are projects like that, and those we usually tend to do. And this is based off of the shipper's preference, as well as it's kind of awkward sometimes the way these turn out, because a historic property might be located in a certain, like phase one of a project, but the phase that you're currently working on, there's no historic properties. And so the original finding might have been a no adverse effect or something. And now you have so we just, based on the awkwardness of the whole thing, we just prefer to do a new finding for the new phase and treat it as a new undertaking. So I think that's the only thing I would like to add, really. So that's usually our guidance on those, but definitely check with us. That's important.
I think that's a really good point, New. And just because you're doing an AI for NEPA doesn't mean we can't. We might need to reopen it and treat it as a separate federal undertaking for Section 106, and that happens sometimes. So, and Shaw, I saw you asked, should we start with team leads for questions about AI and notes to file? That's a good place to start, definitely. I would say probably Anu should be copied on that kind of question. And if it's an LPA project, copy me. If it's a historic bridge project, copy Mary Kennedy. If you know the previous CRO reviewer, it's good to make sure they're in on the loop too. That can, take out a few of the forwarding processes. Does that sound right? And Sean and Susan, is that right? I don't know if you're there.
I think you're right, Anthony.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, any other questions about that issue related to Section 106 AIs?
I would just piggyback on this issue in regards to archaeology too. I know you may in records checks you may see that a project area that you're currently studying has been surveyed in the past, and you may think that it doesn't need resurveyed. Before you make that decision, I would just ask that you contact us and make sure that we are involved in that decision, because if it's done before 2008, before the standard guidelines, then they weren't done to current standards, so we'd probably ask that to be resurveyed. So just be aware of that when you're scoping projects. If you come across something like that, and you want to get our opinion before you formalize your cost estimates and scopes and things, feel free to contact us at any time, or even after you've been hired for the work or whatever. So, but
great, thanks, Sean.
Yeah. Same reasonings behind the AIs.
All right. Well, with that, Patrick, you want to take over for run through a few more things?
Yeah, and real quick, well, we got a couple of other minor things we get questions about sometimes, and so we'll just run through those real quick before we conclude and say bye. So one thing, we get this question periodically about in scope, and that is when we get the question of, when you check in a document to in scope, do you put the distribution letter, attach it to the document itself, And so there's one check-in, it's one document. Or do you have a separate check-in for the distribution letter and then a separate check-in for the document itself? So let's say you have a historic property report, and of course you're going to have a distribution letter conveying that. So so we've seen it go different ways. We haven't always, the CRO reviewers haven't always been consistent about which way we prefer, or letting consultants know what we prefer. But really it seems the consensus in our group is the preference is to combine those into one submission, one document. So if you have a submission letter, attach it to your document, check it in as one document. That'll reduce the content on InScope and the different document types that people are searching for. So to really streamline what is under a project. So that's our preference. And we haven't said anything or rejected in most cases if you've done it differently. but that is our preference, is that it's one, and we think that's easier for the public consulting parties. We think that's an easier way to handle those submissions. And then we have a question from Sarah on this topic, I believe. What about archaeology reports that only some consulting parties see? So the other consulting parties would not be able to see the distribution letter that might detail the archaeology results. Sean, do you want to weigh in on this question?
Well, I think that's a valid point, and is somewhat refutes what you just said. So I don't know how you want to.
No, that's fine.
So the distribution letter, if it was attached with the archaeology report, would only be visible to tribes and us archaeologists.
Well,
archaeologists.
Right. Well, and maybe that's a situation where if we're talking about archaeology reports, then that makes a good case of a separate, because we also want other consulting parties to be aware of what we're doing, even though non-tribal, non-SHPO consulting parties don't have access to the archaeology reports. We do at least want them to be aware that this is going on, that we are coordinating this. And so maybe that is the exception to that, our archaeology reports, that because we want to be as transparent as possible, but as practical as possible too. So I think that is a good point. I think that would be an exception.
Yeah.
And anybody can weigh in real quickly on that if they want through there. But also we've got this kind of issue that's come up recently with, and when you're preparing your 800 for qualified professionals, when you're preparing the 811, so section 2 is really the process. You're detailing that process of identifying historic properties. And section 6, you're talking about the coordination that has been involved, the feedback from consulting parties. So sometimes that is intertwined and it is difficult to separate. But, section 2 is really devoted to that identification of historic properties, that feedback specifically related to eligibility, that identification and eligibility evaluations. Section 6 is really the broader issues, maybe effects and other issues that have come up. So as much as possible, try to detangle that so that section 6 is not just a cut and paste of section 2. And so not a huge deal, but we want these to be as readable and as possible. So that's one thing as you look at your 811s to try to think about that to help kind of make them as readable and streamlined and content driven as possible. So 6 is a distinct area. Otherwise, we might risk people who want to read it and review it not really looking at it because it looks like the same as they've already read. So, and one final item. What documents can a non-QP prepare? So we have a lot of non-qualified professionals who are very capable of doing a lot in the 106 process, writing MOAs, and that's something that's acceptable. Even, writing early coordination letters and filling out a lot of that information. But qualified professionals, we lean on them in the broadest sense, to make those identify historic properties, evaluate historic properties for National Register eligibility, and making effects findings. So that QP is responsible for all that information. So however that comes to our office through a prime consultant, that qualified professional is responsible for that information, the identification, the evaluation, and the assessment of effects. So we understand that sometimes a prime is going to fill out some of that information, just maybe correspondence, part of the, that process that's happened in the 106 process. But the qualified professional is the one that we lean on to make those calls on effects, an identification and evaluation. So in the broadest sense, that's really what we expect of the qualified professional. Anything to add to that, Anthony, or anybody else?
No, I think you summed it up.
All right. So that's just some things we wanted to talk about. We get questions about, so we wanted to share those today real quick. So
can I circle back to InScope?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't get to jump on before you moved on. But I would like to remind everyone to use the proper, make sure you're using the right reviewer when you're uploading documents in the InScope. So we've had multiple instances where, a historian might send you the approval email for an MPPA that had an archaeology report done. Instead of using the historian that sent you that email, I would just ask that you use the archaeology reviewer, and you usually know who that is, because in the paragraph within the email it'll say make sure to send the SHPO submittal letter to Matt Kuhn or Dave Moffett or me or whomever. So that's the archaeology reviewer that you want to use when you upload the archaeology report. Otherwise, it'll go to the historian, and if they're on vacation or out of the office, it might sit there for a few days. And that could apply to just in section 106 to if you have an HPR and an archaeology report, and it happens to be the historian that kind of sends you the approval email and tells you to upload the documents to InScope. Just make sure you're using the historian reviewer and the archaeological reviewer, so those documents are released at the same time, and isn't just sitting in cyberspace or whatever waiting for somebody to approve.
Yep, good point.
Yep. So I think we probably have to move on to the conclusion here. Right, Patrick?
Yep.
Do you have anything else?
No, I think we did cover a lot of ground there.
All right. Well,
actually, before you move on, can I say one thing?
Sure. David Moffett, archaeologist from CRO. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's probably important that we make sure that the qualified professional archaeologists are reviewing undertakings, so that and not just being given project areas by the private consultant, which seems to be happening a lot. The qualified professional archaeologist needs to be the one determining what areas need to be surveyed, and include the whole undertaking in their reports. It just seems to be an issue that's come up consistently, and we just want to make sure that's clear to everybody involved.
Great. Yeah, great reminder. I mean, the last thing you want to do is find out later, you want to make sure that the right area is being surveyed, and you don't want that to come up later on in the project when it can cause issues.
Let the archaeologists determine that area.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. All right. So I thought this went pretty well. I hope you guys agree, but please, we would love feedback, good, bad, whatever, suggestions for improvement. I think we're gonna try to keep on doing this, maybe semi-monthly, or monthly, I should say, hopefully monthly. we might play around with different focuses on different sessions. Maybe one session is devoted more to project managers, one is more to technical issues with preparing HPRs. I'm not sure. So we'd love your ideas, questions, comments. If there's stuff we didn't get to that you have lingering questions about, please contact either Patrick or me. And I think that's, yeah, if you have ideas for topics, for future topics, that would be great. So thank you everyone for joining. Patrick, any final words?
No, yeah, thank you very much for participating. And yeah, please, just to echo Anthony, please, any topic ideas, any audience, if it's LPA, project sponsors, project man, we can kind of tailor this however meets the needs of our community. So we appreciate everybody's time, and thanks for calling in, and stay safe, and hanging in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.